Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Belgium or Spa post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? I have kind of a mixed feelings about this race, with the issues of the rain that was delayed, and then they finally got out there, and it was really quick turnaround going from those intermediates to softs. It kind of threw the field too much into one direction and didn't give you the strategy that I was looking for the pit strategy on changing when to change those tires as much. And then after that, it was just kind of like dragged out a little bit longer. Yes, we had some action in the midfield of people passing each other, but that was mainly due to the intermediate tires and the setups they were configured for, and not necessarily true action on track. So I was kind of disappointed in this race. I was hoping for a lot more out of this race, but it turned out to be, to my opinion, kind of a dull race, especially since we had that big gap at the front. And even for second place to third place was a fairly big gap before we had any really action going on. And it seemed like people had a little bit harder time passing each other. And, due to all the, track transitioning at the very beginning, it didn't seem like they actually got out and started racing as soon as they should have, in my view. Should have had a little bit, maybe start off in wets instead of intermediates, or start off at least a few laps earlier on those intermediates to help gauge a little bit more action there before they switched over to those soft tires, because it was fairly easy, I think, for the whole field to really know when that transition was. And generally the whole, field moved, and of course then got people caught out because they couldn't go into the pits because of their teammates were in the pits, which then shoved them to the back of the field, and where they couldn't really do a whole lot extra after that. So in all, I didn't think it was that great of a race. But what was your thoughts on this race? Like normal, I go from the back of the pack, work my way to the front of the pack, going through each driver and telling you what I thought of them and how they drove in during this race. And if something happened to them, I will let you know what happened to them if I happen to know that as well. So we'll start off the back of the pack with Isaac Haijar, who started off in 8th and ended up in 20th. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 13, switching from those intermediates to a set of mediums, and then going to lap 20 on those mediums before switching to another set of hards. Now, I think his setup was completely wrong for this, and so I think that really shoved him to the back. And of course, when that intermediate, to medium tire happened, it kind of threw him a little bit farther, and then he couldn't get the grips on those medium tires, and so that just ended his race right there. Then we come to Franco Colapinto, who started off in 15th and ended up in 19th. He also had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and then going to lap 28 on those set of mediums before switching to a second set of mediums. He did pass Isaac Haijar for 15th on lap 14. And again, I think he got stuck in that situation because of Gasly going to those, switching from those intermediates to mediums before him, which pushed him back that extra lap that got him stuck in the back of the pack a little bit farther than the rest of them. Carlos Sainz kind of did it to himself in a sense, because he started off in the pit lane due to some farm changes to his car to try to help him gauge in this race. He did start in 17th due to that and ended up in 18th. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to set of mediums, and going to lap 26 on that set of mediums before switching to another set of mediums. He did pass Stroll for 16th on lap 6, passed Haijar on lap 19 for 18th, and he also got a black and white flag for track limits on lap 28. So if he had gone outside those track limits one more time, he would have gotten a penalty. So he was kind of skirting the edge on where he could end up. But I think getting him starting off at the back of the pack, and then because his teammate was up front when that transition happened, he got stuck that extra lap, kind of sticking him back farther in the grid than he maybe should have been. Fernando Alonso started off in the pit again to do PU changes in Parc Fermé. So there's actually 4 people, I think, that start off in the pits, which is kind of odd in my regard to even start off with as well. But anyway, he started off in 20th due to that and ended up in 17th. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 11, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and then going to lap 29 on those set of mediums before switching to another set of mediums. He did pass Stroll for 19th on lap 8, and then passed Stroll again for 18th on lap 10. And otherwise, he had a kind of a quiet day. Both the Aston Martins weren't really performing as well as they probably should have. They were struggling in the qualifying as well as the race. They need to kind of figure out where that downforce and top speed are on the Aston Martin to help them out. So hopefully next weekend they can get that wrapped up and have a little better weekend next weekend. But other than that, I mean, he kind of cut a quiet day, so it's not a whole lot I can really judge him on besides that car that they're in of the Aston Martin. Now, Kimi Antonelli started off in the pit lane again due to PU changes in Parc Ferme. He did start in 19th and ended up in 16th, so gained a little bit of ground there. He had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and then going to lap 30 on those set of mediums before switching to a second set of mediums. Now, part of that, I think, is they didn't think it would be worth the extra stop, but they didn't trying to do something to get them a little bit farther up in the advance. So they were trying to gauge on those extra, fresh set of mediums, which didn't turn out quite as well as I think they would have liked. I think they would have liked to get bumped up a little bit more than where they ended up. He did pass Stroll for 18th on lap 7, passed Hijar on lap 17 for 16th, passed Franco for 15th on lap 20, and passed Alonso for 14th on lap 27. So he had a little bit of action in there, but overall, I think he was kind of struggling in the back of the pack with those cars around him, not being able to gain that much ground due to the circumstances they were in. So not the greatest day for Kimi Antonelli. I think it hurt him initially on that spin earlier on, and then he just couldn't quite get his act together due to all the things this weekend for this setup. So hopefully he can, piece that together and get closer to his teammate next weekend. This gets us to Esteban Ocon, who started off in 11th and ended up in 15th. He had a 1-stop strategy, stopping on lap 13, switching from intermediates to set of mediums and taking that mediums to the rest of the way. He did pass Hulkenberg for 14th on lap 34. Then we have Lance Stroll, who started off in 16th and ended up in 14th. He also had a 1-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12 for switching from those intermediates to a set of mediums. He did pass Alonso for 19th on lap 8, passed Hijar for 17th on lap 18, and passed Franco Colapinto for 16th on lap 22. He didn't have a whole lot of extra in that so he was only a spot or two ahead of his teammate, which didn't really play out that well for the Aston Martins. Yuki kind of got stuck in that method of, being the next person in line. So he kind of got shoved in the back a little bit farther in doing those pit stop strategies, as he started off in 7th and ended up in 13th. He had a 1-stop strategy, but stopped on lap 13, so a little bit long for that, but due to his teammate switching those intermediates to a set of mediums. Then kind of sticking out there, and then those tires were kind of giving away near the end and getting a little bit of passing opportunities for those around him. So that's because of Nico Hulkenberg started off in 14th and ended up in 12th. He did a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 11 and switching from intermediates to a set of mediums and taking those mediums to a lap 32 before switching to another set of mediums. I think he was the last person to do a 2-stop strategy that made it that far up. So I think 12th was the range, and I think he was hoping to get farther up there and actually get some points in that regard, because he was running up there in those points before he swapped for that second pit stop strategy, which he wasn't quite able to truly take advantage of. Still getting up there, but not quite into the points where he needed to be. So a decent job running, and just a bad strategy calls, I think, for a lot of these people in the back. He did pass Ocon for 14th on lap 34. He passed Stroll for 13th on lap 38 and passed Yuki for 12th on that very last lap 44. So getting up there, but not quite far enough in that advance. And this puts us where Oliver Behrman ended up starting off in 12th and ended up in 11th. He had a 1-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums. He passed Ocon for 11th on lap 11, passed Alonso for 13th on lap 17, and passed Yuki for 11th on lap 43. Now, he was complaining about qualifying, is that he should have easily gotten into Q3, but unfortunately that didn't play out for him due to those runnings, not getting the gaps that he needed at the very end. And so putting him back farther in that, he did pass his teammate early on in lap 11 that gave him the lead, that gave him the preferential treatment for that pit stop strategy, which allowed him to get up close to the points, but not quite where he needed to be. I also heard that there were some different strategies going on in those cars, where Oliver Behrman had a higher downforce strategy and Ocon had a low downforce strategy on their car setup. So that could have played into it as well, but getting in there and getting on in front made the biggest difference in my viewpoint. So making it to the top 10, we see Pierre Gasly, who started off in 13th and ended up in 10th. A really good run for him, getting up there, getting that extra point. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 11, switching from intermediates to that set of mediums, and then sticking it out. Otherwise, he had a kind of a boring race, kind of holding up some of the pack around this track, not being able to pass him, keeping them at bay, but not really being able to attack those people in front of him overall. So he did a decent job, and they need to work on that Alpine to get a little bit more competitive in these runnings to be able to push a little bit farther up. But a really good job from him to get that extra point. Gabriel Bortoleto started off in 10th and ended up in 9th. He had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums. And he did swap positions with his teammate Hulkenberg for 9th on lap 20. Really good job for Gabriel, getting up there, getting up in that closer to that 10th position, close to those points to start off with in qualifying, being able to maintain that throughout this race was really good. And then, of course, swapping positions with his teammate because he was a little bit quicker on that run. Didn't hurt him at all in that running as well. This gets us to Liam Lawson, who started off in 9th and ended up in 8th. He had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and he did pass Isaac Haijar for 8th on lap 12. So another good job for Liam Lawson in this regard, getting up there, getting up into that 9th position in qualifying, kind of showing where those racing bulls can reside just behind his teammate, but then able to get past him fairly early on in that race and just kind of stay there in that running behind the big wigs like Lewis Hamilton and Alexander Albon in that running, keeping up fairly decently, but not really super competitive, but still a good run from Liam Lawson in my viewpoint for that racing bull. This gets us to our driver of the day, Lewis Hamilton, who started off in the pit lane due to PU changes under the Parc Fermé after having an abysmal qualifying session, so it didn't really hurt him that much in that regard. He did start off in 18th and ended up in 7th. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 11, switching from the intermediates to a set of mediums. And he was probably the main trigger for the whole group to switch. I think he was the first one to actually roll into that pit lane to do that switch. So that he was really good on those intermediates, and then he got back on those mediums and still was fairly good in those mediums throughout this race. He did pass Stroll for 17th on lap 6, passed Sainz for 16th on lap 8, passed Franco for 15th on lap 8, passed Hulkenberg for 14th on lap 9, passed Gasly for 13th on lap 9, and passed Lawson after coming back out of the pits for 10th on lap 12. So a really good job for Lewis Hamilton. Does he deserve the driver of the day? I don't know. I mean, that's really cool to see him. It did a lot of passing coming from the back, but didn't quite get there up far enough in my viewpoint to really warrant driver of the day. I think it probably should have gone to Oscar for being able to really pressure and take advantage on that very first lap to get in that lead and really shine and then hold off his teammate throughout the rest of this race. But that was my viewpoint. What is your viewpoint? Who do you think is the driver of the day? I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. This gets us to Alexander Albon, who did an excellent job of getting up into that 6th position. Starting off in 5th was really awesome to see in that qualifying session. but ended up in 6th overall. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and then basically staying in that rut for the rest of this race, not being able to really put pressure on George Russell, and having Lewis Hamilton, breathing down his neck for most of this race, being able to hold off Lewis as well was really good to see. Being able to, position that car and really put those pressure on him throughout this race, but yet still succeed in getting that 6th position. This gets us to the top 5, where we see George Russell, who started off in 6th and ended up in 5th. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums. And I said he passed Albon for 5th on lap 6th, and then he passed Ocon for 7th on lap 13. Otherwise, he did a really good job in that Mercedes. I know that Mercedes was kind of faltering a little bit. They're not sure why it's so good in certain circumstances and not good in others, so they need to get a little bit more grip on that Mercedes to try to figure out the best strategy for them moving forward. But overall, I think George Russell has been doing really good this season, and he did another good performance here, getting up into that 5th position, getting some good points for Mercedes and himself in the driver's standings. And of course, just ahead of him was Max Verstappen, which he did put a little bit of pressure on Max a few times in this race, but was not quite able to get past Max. Max started off in 4th and ended up in 4th. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and he did pass Ocon for 6th on lap 13. Otherwise, he was kind of dogging Charles Leclerc for most of this race. Couldn't quite get past him, and at one point, he looked like he was going to get by him, got up beside him, but was not able to maintain that around that corner. And then he basically had to fall back in line and basically stayed there for the rest of the race. I know there were some questions whether he could have outdone him during the pit stops, but due to that strategy, he got thrown back a little bit in that running, getting held up a little bit. So there was some of that was playing out against him, but a decent run for Max Verstappen. Didn't quite end up where he wanted, I think, because of that downforce change that they made to that Red Bull. He wasn't able to easily get past Charles Leclerc, and that kind of held him back a little bit in this running, so he couldn't really show what he could do in these conditions. This gets us to our 3rd position, Charles Leclerc, who started off in 3rd and ended up in 3rd. He had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and he did pass Ocon for 5th on lap 13. And he did a really good job in that Ferrari. Ferrari was lagging quite a bit in this race, but able to hold up Max Verstappen and still maintain that 3rd position. Getting it on 3rd in the qualifying and maintaining that throughout this race was a really good job for him. Trying to understand those updates that they brought to that Ferrari. Hopefully they can gain that and get some more to be a little bit more competitive to the Red Bulls and, of course, the McLarens. Hopefully more in this season as we kind of start getting our downward slope for this season. This gets us to Lando Norris, who started off in 1st and ended up in 2nd. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping one lap behind his teammate due to those circumstances, stopping on lap 13, switching from intermediates, and he chose to switch over to a set of hards to hopefully get a little bit more advantage near the end of the race, which didn't quite turn out to be the case. He did have a slow stop that put him 8.4 seconds behind his teammate Oscar, which I think kind of hurt him because it was a little bit slower stop, so he didn't quite get the ability to gain that extra ground on him. He did gain some ground. Of course, he was making some mistakes in this pursuit of his teammate, which kind of helped him and hurt him a couple of times when he was gaining ground and getting in the rhythm, and then make a mistake and then lose all that time that he gained and then have to really make that up. And so that was putting a lot more pressure on him before he could do that, where he's getting the engineer coming over the radio basically telling him to basically calm down and just run your race. Don't push too hard. You're generally faster than his teammate to start off with, so you'll gain the ground and you'll see that coming without actually having to push it to the very last millimeter on the track. So I think that helped him out a little bit more at the end, but it didn't quite have enough time to really get grips on those set of hards versus the set of mediums that his teammate were on. I think he was hoping those mediums would wear out quicker, and then Oscar would lose the time and make it, closer to where that end result would be him coming back and being able to pass his teammate for first. So I think he did a decent job. I don't think he was quite comfortable with the conditions at the very beginning, on those intermediates, quite as well as his teammate, and that's what basically made this race, because Oscar was able to. And speaking of Oscar, he basically started off in second and ended up in first. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 12, switching from intermediates to a set of mediums, and he did pass his teammate Lando for first on lap 5, which is basically the very start of the race. That's the first actually active lap on turn 5. And I think that was what the key catalyst was. It was that Oscar was willing to push it and had the belief that he could stick it, keep the grip that he needed, on that very first lap when it went green, and that helped him out and got ahead, and that gave him the ability to just kind of run away with it. And then, of course, with that pit stop issue that Lando had, that just extended that gap and made it almost impossible in Lando's mind, I think, to gain that ground, and that hurt him in that sense because he was trying to overdrive it instead of letting it flow to him. But overall, I think both Lando and Oscar did a good job. I think Oscar probably deserves the driver of the day, as I said earlier, because of that first move and knowing when he could do it. I know he was saying he was worried because it didn't start off as a standing start, that he would have the advantage, but he was able to maintain that gap, that minimal gap on that very first lap to put that edge on it and do that pass in that corner and make it stick. So I grant it to him to be able to get out in front and take that advantage and then basically hold off his teammate the rest of the way. Switching from those medium tires and really thinking that there were going to be a two-stop race, but then switching it to a one-stop, so he was able to maintain those tires throughout this race, as most people did, but it was just that thought necessarily at the beginning of the race where you thought was more along those lines. So I think it was a good job for Oscar, so he probably deserves the driver of the day. And to kind of show you how this race went, of course, we had a nice big long delay start because of the rain, and we finally got out with a safety car going from laps 1 through 4 and had a rolling start. So on that very first lap, where Oscar overtook Lando, when they came back around, he had a 1.12 second lead over Lando. By lap 10, it was a 1.57 second lead for Oscar over Lando. And lap 15, it was up to a 9.02 second lead for Oscar over Lando because of those pit stops. And then lap 22, it was down a little bit, but not near enough, down to a 8.29 second lead for Oscar over Lando. And it basically maintained that on lap 30, where it was an 8.3 second lead for Oscar over Lando. Now it started dropping significantly a little bit. By lap 40, it was a 4.41 second lead for Oscar over Lando, but that wasn't enough time to get him up there. And so by the end of the race, he was only ahead by 3.41 seconds for Oscar. And so Lando didn't really have a chance by the time that things were starting to waver on that, till quite a bit behind to really put super long pressure on Oscar. But overall, I think it was a kind of a interesting race, not a very, enjoyable race, and not an entertaining race in my view, kind of dull, but an interesting race, the way it kind of played out. And the rate when it was chosen to actually, delay that, should have been, called earlier to start going back out on track. Should the safety car have come in and the race started, a lap or two earlier? When should wets actually be encountered versus the intermediates? Because I know there's lots of complaints that why have wet tires if you're not going to use them? If you're going to wait till the intermediates are the tire of choice for the start of the race, then what's the point of having wet tires? And then of course the visibility versus the safety concerns all kind of play into that. But I think in my viewpoint, I think we could at least have started the race a lap or two earlier and made it a little bit more interesting in those first few laps, where it was still fairly wet for those intermediates, and be able to gauge those drivers who have that extra little bit of ability on those intermediates. And then maybe you would have gotten a little bit of different lap changes for those slick tires to figure out when that transition was. And somebody might have come in a lap or two earlier than they did, and that would have potentially put some other different dynamics in this race. But overall, once that switched over and everybody kind of ran, it was kind of a dull race because you didn't seem to get a whole lot of action during this race. But again, what was your thoughts on this race? So what did this do to our driver standings? Well, we see Liam Lawson jumping up with 16 points now, going up to 14th place, jumping Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso. And we see Pierre Gasly jumping up to 12th over Lance Stroll, with 20 points. We still have the rest of the field kind of in that realm where they were before, gaining some ground or losing ground depending on who you look at in general. But of course you see Oscar gaining that gap between him and Lando Norris. Oscar with 266 points over Lando's 250. And for the constructor standings, there was no really changes here. The big thing I think here is that, you still have that really close dynamic between Haas and Aston Martin, with Haas with 35 points and Aston Martin with 36, with no changes going to effect. Alpine gaining that point, so getting a little bit closer to the Haas, but still kind of far behind. And then, of course, you have the Racing Bulls gaining a little bit of ground from the Aston Martins, but putting a little bit more pressure on that Kick Sauber, Ferrari car. And then Williams, making a sound effort on that fifth marker, making it pretty much steady that they're going to be in that position to the end of the season. And you have the Red Bulls gaining a little bit of ground on Mercedes, and Ferrari, holding it out there. But, McLaren dominant over all with that 516 points. So if you made it this far, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, as I will be doing this again next week when we go to the Hungary for the Hungarian Ring on August 3rd. It's back to a normal race weekend, and this Hungarian Ring has a length of 2.722 miles, and it'll have 70 laps being run for a total race distance of 190.531 miles. Its current lap record holder is Lewis Hamilton in 2020 with 1 minute 16.627 seconds. And it was first introduced in 1986. So until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.